6 Feet Under is the 22nd episode of the second season of Everybody Loves Raymond. This is directed by Jeff Melman, and as always, there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And this is a really great episode and unfortunately quite relatable for me, and I imagine for quite a lot of people as well. It starts off in the kitchen. They're about to measure Ali's height, and Ray decides to show how it's done. And Debra measures him at 5'11" and 3/4. And Ray doesn't understand because he's always been 6 foot. And Debra suggests maybe he's shrunk, which is something that happens as you get older. You do begin to shrink. And in that moment, I completely understood Ray's anxiety. But probably on the opposite end of the scale, Ray is worried that he's going to be under 6 foot. He's always been really tall. It's part of his identity, I guess. And he's worried about losing that. I'm the opposite end, by which I mean I'm exactly a foot shorter. And I'm worried that I'm going to become even shorter. So I really relate to Ray's anxieties here. And he's then playing basketball with the Nemo's crew. And he's worried that his apparently shorter height is affecting his game, and they suggest that he makes a list of things he wants to do before he dies. Maybe that's why he's getting anxious about this, because he's realising he's getting older, and this is kind of what the episode is about. And he discusses having a midlife crisis with Debra, and Debra is briefly concerned, but then she sees Ray's list of things he wants to do before he dies. And largely it's food. Honestly, I don't think that's a bad idea. I think there are some dishes that many of us would want to eat one day, but we've never got round to doing it. I think that's not a bad thing to put on your bucket list. And then he had enlarged prostate written down. And I don't think he needed to explain that, but I just thought this was so funny. He said, "That's something I wish to avoid, not something I wish to eat." Not funny when I say it, but the delivery of the line from Romano was brilliant. Debra then suggests writing the great American novel, and honestly, I don't feel like a person's bucket list or a person's dreams need to be that colossal. I feel like just having food that you want to try is enough, in my personal opinion. Obviously, if you do want to write the great American novel, fantastic, but I don't think anybody should belittle somebody else's goals just because the goals don't seem that significant. And I don't think Debra had the right attitude here. I love her, but she didn't have the right attitude, in my opinion. So Ray asked her, well, what are your dreams? What are your goals? And she says that she'd like to open a bed and breakfast one day. And then Debra actually thought of something that I thought was quite thought-provoking and could actually be really beneficial for anybody in Ray's position. And she said maybe Ray's having a difficult time coming up with any real goals because he's content. And I thought that was actually quite thought-provoking. Now, that's not to say that if you don't have goals, you're perfectly happy. But if there's nothing that's coming to your mind that you want to achieve, that could be a good sign that actually you are relatively happy. And really thought about this and then realised that was actually not a great thought because, as he says, this is all there is. He then goes to his parents. Robert is actually training for the New York Marathon, which he realised is a goal that he also has. And Ray is telling him that he's quite jealous of him because he's got a dream. I've got nothing, in Ray's words. And Robert gives this wonderful, I don't know if I want to call it a speech or a rant, but basically over the course of about 1 or 2 minutes, points out everything that Ray has. And I think that is obviously very funny in the context of the episode, but also I think so important because as this episode shows, your dreams don't always have to be these huge things. And actually, if you do feel content with your life, that's not a bad thing. And I think we're always just in general encouraged to strive for more and more and more. And in balance, that's fine. But Ray is thinking, well, he hasn't got anything because he doesn't have a dream. But Robert points out, you've got all of these things, the family, the children, the career. And I think that's really important, that even though you might not be a multi-millionaire with a huge mansion, actually look at all of these beautiful things that you do have. And to an outsider, you actually do have a lot to be thankful for. And I think that's a really nice moment, but also, of course, very funny. And Frank manages to make things a little bit darker by saying, "You die, you did what you did." But actually, I think this is also really interesting. It's a very thought-provoking episode. And the point Frank was making there is that not everybody is going to do everything. I can't remember the exact examples that he gave, but it was basically this person will do this job and this person will do that job. And that's it. Everybody has their allocated path, and that you can strive to have it all, but pretty much nobody is going to have it all. And you did what you did, and that's it. Everybody has their own, whatever they leave behind, whether it's a legacy or their journey or whatever, and that not everybody is going to strive for every single goal. And I thought it was, again, really interesting. Marie is not happy with Frank talking about death, but she does point out, well, she tries to point out that they've made their preparations for death and they have their joint burial plot, and it turns out Frank sold his half of the burial plot, which sounds callous, but actually, he explains kind of briefly, he doesn't really let this sit for too long. Basically, we don't have enough time to praise Frank for this, but what he did, apparently, was sell it to somebody who was in the next plot, and they had somebody who unfortunately died, and they wanted that plot next to them, and Frank did a really selfless thing. Well, I say it's selfless, but Frank now also doesn't have a plot next to Marie, so maybe there was a little bit of selfishness there, but I thought that was actually really sweet of Frank. Probably should have spoken to Marie about it, but nevertheless. A little while later, Ray then comes home. He's been thinking, and he tells Debra he wants to be cremated. Debra is not happy with all of this death talk, and then Marie comes over and says she's found a cemetery to fit them all in, but somebody is going to have to go vertically, and it can't be Robert because his head will stick out. And I love how calmly she said that. There was basically no emotion in her voice. It was just matter of fact. If Robert is vertical, his head will stick out, which I thought was very funny. And the way Debra says yes when Marie says, "That's morbid, dear," was just beautiful. Absolutely fabulous. And then we are in the bedroom again in the evening, and this is something that I'd kind of noticed but never thought about. And I think this is also really interesting because Debra points out she's already had her midlife crisis, and Ray is confused because he doesn't remember any of this happening. And she explains that part of that is her applying hand cream to her hands every night because I think she said a few years ago she realised that her skin wasn't as soft as it used to be, and that's kind of when she went into panic mode and realised she was getting older. And as she explained, she kind of went into denial. And I had noticed that Debra does apply hand cream a lot. When they're in bed, it's kind of the last thing she does before she says goodnight to Ray. I had noticed that, but I never really thought about it because it's not that unusual. Applying hand cream, it's something I do often, not every night, but often applying hand cream just before I get into bed. But actually to have a little bit more information about why she does that is actually really interesting, and I found that to be rather fascinating. And she helped solve the problem for Ray because she bought, as she said, as a joke, she bought him some insoles to give him back that 1/4 of an inch that he'd lost. And Ray thought this was ridiculous, but he puts them on, or puts them in his shoes, and he suddenly feels better. And I love that. If you have something that's really causing you a lot of problems or a lot of anxiety, maybe the solution is something as simple as a pair of insoles to make you feel the way you were before you realised whatever it was that's causing you this anxiety. And I think that that's wonderful. I don't think insoles can solve every problem, but it's nice to know that actually sometimes things are not as difficult as we make them out to be. We then have a wonderful final scene. Don't know why I said final twice there. And it's so beautiful because Marie is calling Frank down for his ice cream. Robert points out he's not there, he's gone out. And then we just cut to Frank in a karaoke singing like Tony Bennett, which he'd mentioned earlier in the episode was his dream. And he kind of said, "I want to sing like Tony Bennett, but look what I've got in life." And at some point he must have realised, actually, I can achieve that. And off he went, and it's so wonderful. And I just thought it was beautiful and a a side of Frank we don't really ever get to see, so I thought that was lovely. It's a great episode, really funny in a lot of places, but really thought-provoking and beneficial as well. And unfortunately, for those of us with height fears, anxieties, a little bit more relatable than one would like, but ultimately 6 feet under is pretty great.